The small town of Maplewood was buzzing with excitement. It was a crisp autumn morning, and the streets were lined with golden leaves that crunched underfoot as people hurried toward St. Mary's Church. Everyone in town had been talking about this day for weeks, Sarah and Mark's wedding. Sarah, a kind-hearted kindergarten teacher who always greeted her students with a warm smile, was beloved by all. Mark, a talented architect known for his charm and generosity, seemed like the perfect match for her. Together, they made a couple everyone adored. St. Mary's Church stood at the heart of the town, its tall steeple reaching toward the sky. Inside, rows of wooden pews gleamed from hours of polishing, and fresh flowers adorned every corner. The scent of lilies filled the air, mixing with the faint aroma of old books and polished wood. Guests chatted quietly, their voices blending into a soft hum of anticipation. Children fidgeted in their seats while parents hushed them playfully. Outside, photographers adjusted their cameras, ready to capture the magical moment when two souls would promise forever. Father Thomas, an elderly priest with wisps of gray hair and glasses perched on the edge of his nose, stood near the altar, flipping through the pages of his worn Bible. He had known Sarah since she was a little girl running around the churchyard during Sunday school. Over the years, he'd watched her grow into a remarkable woman. Mark, too, had become a familiar face, attending services sporadically, but always showing respect for the traditions of the church. Father Thomas felt honored to officiate their union, though he couldn't shake off a strange feeling that had settled in the pit of his stomach, a fleeting sense of unease he couldn't quite explain. As the clock ticked closer to noon, the organist began playing a soft prelude. The congregation rose to their feet, turning their heads toward the entrance. The doors creaked open, and Sarah appeared, radiant in a flowing white gown embroidered with delicate lace. Her veil cascaded down her back like a waterfall, glinting softly in the sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. On her father's arm, she looked every bit the fairy tale bride. Gasps of admiration rippled through the crowd, followed by whispers of how stunning she looked. But something caught Father Thomas's eye. As Sarah stepped forward, the light danced across her neck, revealing a faint mark beneath the lace collar of her dress. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, a shadow, perhaps, or a trick of the light. But as she moved closer, the mark became clearer. It wasn't jewelry or makeup. It looked almost like scars. Father Thomas blinked, trying to dismiss the thought. Maybe it was nothing, just his imagination playing tricks on him. Yet the longer he stared, the more unsettled he felt. The murmurs of the guests faded into the background as Father Thomas focused on the figure approaching the altar. Sarah's smile was bright, her eyes sparkling with happiness. She radiated joy, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside the priest's mind. Mark, standing beside him, beamed proudly, holding out his hand to take hers. Everything seemed perfect, too perfect, almost. Father Thomas swallowed hard, forcing himself to smile as Sarah arrived at the altar. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. And as the ceremony began, he couldn't stop wondering. What exactly had he seen? The side room was dimly lit, its walls lined with old wooden shelves stacked with dusty hymnals and forgotten prayer books. The air smelled faintly of aged paper and candle wax, a stark contrast to the fresh floral scent that had filled the main hall. Father Thomas closed the door gently behind them, muffling the murmurs of confusion coming from the congregation outside. For a moment, neither he nor Sarah spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, almost suffocating. Sarah stood awkwardly, clutching her bouquet so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her smile from moments ago had vanished, replaced by an expression of unease and embarrassment. "Father, I don't understand," she stammered, her voice trembling slightly. "What's going on? Why did you stop the ceremony?" She glanced toward the door, as if expecting someone to burst in and explain everything. But there was only the two of them, her and the priest who had known her since childhood. Father Thomas took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. He didn't want to scare her or make her feel cornered, but he also couldn't ignore what he had seen. "Sarah," he began, his tone gentle yet firm, "please forgive me for interrupting such an important moment. But when I saw that mark on your neck earlier, it troubled me deeply. It doesn't look like something ordinary, a birthmark or a scar from an accident." He paused, studying her face for any sign of recognition. "I need to know the truth. What is it?" For a split second, Sarah looked as though she might deny it again. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out. Instead, she lowered her gaze, staring at the floor as if searching for answers written in the cracks between the tiles. Tears welled up in her eyes, shimmering like dewdrops before spilling over onto her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. "It's nothing serious, Father," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "Just something that happened a while ago. Something I didn't tell anyone about, not even Mark." Her hands trembled as she adjusted the lace collar of her dress, pulling it aside just enough to reveal the mark more clearly. Father Thomas stepped closer, squinting to get a better look. Now that he could see it up close, the details were unmistakable, faint lines crisscrossing one another, forming a pattern that resembled stitches. It wasn't natural. It looked deliberate, almost surgical. "Sarah," Father Thomas said softly, his heart sinking as he realized the gravity of the situation. "This isn't just something that happened. Whatever this is, it's significant. And if it's affecting you, if it's causing you pain or fear, you owe it to yourself and to Mark to be honest about it." He placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, hoping to reassure her that he wasn't judging her. "You can trust me. Tell me everything." Sarah hesitated, biting her lip as tears continued to stream down her face. Finally, she nodded, taking the shaky breath. "All right," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of emotion. "But you have to promise not to tell anyone. Not yet. Not until I figure out how to handle this myself." Father Thomas gave her a solemn nod, promising to keep her confidence. With that, Sarah began to speak, her words halting at first, but gradually gaining strength as she recounted the story she had kept hidden for months. As she talked, the pieces started falling into place for Father Thomas. This wasn't just a simple misunderstanding or a trivial secret. It was something far bigger, far darker than either of them could have imagined. And as the full scope of Sarah's revelation unfolded, the priest knew that stopping the wedding might have been the most important decision he'd ever made. Sarah's voice trembled as she began to speak, her words spilling out in fragments like scattered puzzle pieces. She stared at the floor, unable to meet Father Thomas's eyes, as if ashamed of what she was about to reveal. "It happened months ago," she started, her tone hesitant but determined. "I was in a car accident, a bad one. I don't think anyone knows about it except me and, well, the people who helped me afterward." Father Thomas listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. He pulled up a chair and gestured for Sarah to sit, sensing that this story would take time. The room felt smaller now, the weight of her words pressing against the walls. She sank into the seat, clutching her bouquet tightly in her lap as though it were a lifeline. "I don't remember much from the crash itself," Sarah continued, her voice soft but steady. "But I woke up in a hospital, or at least I thought it was a hospital. Everything was so blurry, and my head hurt so badly. There were doctors there, or at least, they said they were doctors." She paused, swallowing hard. "They told me I'd been lucky to survive, but I needed surgery right away. Something about internal injuries. I don't even know if it was true." Father Thomas leaned forward, his expression growing graver with each word. "Go on," he urged gently, encouraging her to keep talking. He could see how difficult this was for her, but he also knew she needed to get it all out. "They said the procedure wouldn't cost me anything," Sarah explained, her voice wavering slightly. "A benefactor had covered everything. Whoever it was, I never found out their name. All I had to do was sign some papers agreeing not to tell anyone about what happened or where I'd been treated. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. I just wanted to live, Father. You have no idea how scared I was. Her hands trembled as she reached up to touch the mark on her neck, tracing the faint lines beneath her fingers. Afterward, they told me these scars would fade eventually, but her voice trailed off, and she shook her head sadly. They haven't. And every time I look in the mirror, I'm reminded of what happened, of what I agreed to. Father Thomas sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Something about this story didn't add up. Legitimate hospitals didn't demand confidentiality agreements like this, not unless something unethical was going on. Did you ever try to find out more? He asked cautiously. About the facility, the doctors, or the so-called benefactor? Sarah shook her head, tears streaming down her face again. I couldn't risk it, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. The agreement said if I broke my promise, there would be consequences. I didn't know what that meant exactly, but it sounded serious, so I kept quiet. Even when Mark proposed, I didn't say anything. How could I? What if he thought I was hiding something terrible? What if he left me? Her last words hung in the air, heavy with fear and regret. Father Thomas felt a pang of sympathy for her. Sarah wasn't just dealing with guilt over keeping secrets. She was terrified of losing the man she loved because of them. But deep down, he knew the truth couldn't stay buried forever. Secrets like this had a way of surfacing when least expected, often causing far more damage than honesty ever could. Sarah, he said firmly but kindly, leaning closer to catch her gaze, you're not alone in this. Whatever happened to you, whatever you signed, that doesn't define you. What matters is what you do next. You can't let fear control your life, especially not today, on what should be one of the happiest days of your life. He hesitated, choosing his next words carefully. If we don't understand the full picture here, how can you move forward with confidence, with Mark, or with anyone else? Sarah nodded slowly, her tears subsiding as she absorbed his words. For the first time since entering the side room, she looked less like a frightened girl and more like the strong, resilient woman Father Thomas had always known her to be. What should I do? She asked quietly, her voice tinged with both hope and uncertainty. We start by finding answers, Father Thomas replied, his tone resolute. Together, in the days that followed, news of Sarah's interrupted wedding spread like wildfire through Maplewood. The small town, usually quiet and uneventful, buzzed with speculation. Some people judged Sarah harshly, whispering behind her back about why she hadn't been honest from the start. Others rallied around her, offering unwavering support and admiration for her courage to face the truth head-on. Despite the mixed reactions, one thing was clear. Sarah had become a symbol of resilience. With Father Thomas's guidance, Sarah decided to take action. She contacted local authorities, sharing everything she knew about the mysterious facility, the so-called benefactor, and the associate who had unknowingly led her into danger. Detectives listened intently, their expressions growing darker as they realized the scope of what might be happening. It turned out Sarah wasn't alone. Other victims had come forward in nearby towns, each describing eerily similar experiences. Piece by piece, a larger picture began to emerge. A criminal network exploiting vulnerable patients for illegal medical experiments, possibly tied to black market organ trafficking. As investigations unfolded, Mark worked tirelessly to uncover the role his business associate had played. Though devastated by the betrayal, he refused to let guilt consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into helping Sarah seek justice. Together, they combed through old emails, contracts, and connections, determined to expose the truth. Their partnership transformed from romantic love into something deeper, a bond forged in shared pain and purpose. Sarah also made the difficult decision to step away from planning her future with Mark, at least for now. I can't move forward until I've healed, she told him one evening as they sat together on the porch of her childhood home. Not just physically, but emotionally. I need to forgive myself for keeping secrets and find peace within me first. Mark nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. Take all the time you need, he said softly. No matter what happens, I'll always care about you. Though it broke both their hearts, they agreed to part ways temporarily, not as lovers, but as allies committed to rebuilding their lives. Father Thomas remained a constant source of strength for Sarah throughout this journey. He encouraged her to speak openly about her experience, not only to heal herself, but also to warn others. With his blessing, Sarah held a community meeting at St. Mary's Church, where she bravely recounted her story. Her voice trembled at times, but her determination never wavered. By the end of the evening, several attendees approached her, revealing that they or someone they knew had faced similar situations. Together, they formed a support group, vowing to hold the perpetrators accountable. The scandal sent shockwaves far beyond Maplewind. News outlets picked up the story, shining a spotlight on the dark underbelly of experimental medicine. Law enforcement launched a full-scale investigation, dismantling the operation linked to Sarah's case. Arrests were made, including high-profile figures involved in funding and facilitating the illegal surgeries. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, not just for herself, but for everyone who had suffered silently. Though the dream wedding ended in chaos, Sarah emerged stronger than ever. She returned to teaching, finding solace in the laughter of her students and the simplicity of routine. Mark, too, found a renewed sense of purpose, dedicating himself to ethical practices in his field and advocating for transparency in business dealings. One crisp autumn morning, nearly a year after the halted ceremony, Sarah stood outside St. Mary's Church once again. This time, however, she wasn't wearing a wedding gown. She was volunteering at a charity event organized by the support group she'd helped create. As she watched families gather and share stories of survival, she realized that life didn't always follow the script we imagined. Sometimes, the hardest moments became turning points, leading us toward paths we never expected. Father Thomas joined her, smiling warmly. "You've done remarkable work, Sarah," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Through your courage, you've given others a chance to heal." Sarah smiled back, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Thank you, Father," she replied, "for everything." And as she walked away from the church that day, she carried not bitterness or regret, but gratitude for second chances, for truth, and for the strength to keep moving forward. Father Thomas's words lingered in the air, giving Sarah a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in months. But as much as she wanted to believe him, doubt still gnawed at her. "Find answers," she echoed softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "How? I don't even know where to start. What if it's too late?" The priest placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and steady. "It's never too late to uncover the truth," he said firmly. "We'll take it one step at a time. First, we need to confirm where you were treated and who these so-called doctors were. That mark on your neck, it's not something ordinary. It tells me there's more to this story than meets the eye." Sarah hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the lace of her dress. "But what about the agreement I signed?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if they come after me for breaking it?" Father Thomas shook his head, his expression calm but determined. "You didn't sign that paper willingly, Sarah. You were vulnerable, scared, and desperate to survive. No one can fault you for wanting to live. And if those people are hiding something illegal or unethical, then they're the ones who should be afraid, not you." His words struck a chord deep within her, stirring a sense of resolve she hadn't realized she possessed. Slowly, Sarah nodded, taking the shaky breath. "Okay," she whispered. "Where do we begin?" "We start with the basics," Father Thomas replied, pulling out his phone. "Do you remember the name of the hospital, or whatever it was called, where you woke up after the accident?" Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall details from that hazy time. After a moment, she shook her head. "I don't think it had a proper name. Just a logo, some kind of symbol, a circle with lines through it, like a target." Father Thomas jotted down the description, his mind already working through possibilities. "That's a start," he said. And what about the doctors? Do you remember any names? Anything unusual about them? Sarah frowned, concentrating hard. One of them stood out, a man with sharp features and cold eyes. He introduced himself as Dr. Grayson, but I'm not sure if that was real. He kept saying things like, "We're saving lives here, and you'll thank us later." She shuddered involuntarily, the memory sending chills down her spine. The priest nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Grayson," he repeated, writing the name down. "Even if it's fake, it could still lead us somewhere. Did anyone else interact with you? Nurses, assistants, anyone?" There was a nurse, Sarah recalled, her voice growing steadier as fragments of memory surfaced. She seemed kinder than the others, almost sympathetic. Once, when no one else was around, she whispered something to me. "Be careful who you trust." At the time, I didn't understand what she meant, but now, her voice trailed off, her eyes widening with realization. "Do you think she was trying to warn me?" "It's possible," Father Thomas said, his tone cautious but intrigued. "People involved in shady operations often have mixed feelings about what they're doing. Maybe she doubted their intentions, or maybe she wanted to help you without risking her own position." Sarah sat quietly for a moment, absorbing everything. For the first time since the accident, she felt like she wasn't completely alone. With Father Thomas by her side, the overwhelming burden of her secret began to feel slightly lighter. But there was still one pressing question weighing heavily on her mind. "What happens if we find out something bad?" she asked, her voice tinged with fear. "Something criminal." Father Thomas met her gaze, his expression unwavering. "Then we deal with it together," he said simply. "If these people harmed you, or worse, we'll make sure justice is served. But until we know the full truth, there's no point jumping to conclusions. Let's focus on gathering facts first." Encouraged by his calm demeanor, Sarah took another deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "All right," she said, her voice firmer this time. "Let's do it." As they prepared to leave the side room, Father Thomas glanced at her wedding gown, its pristine fabric glowing faintly in the dim light. "Sarah," he said gently, "this isn't how today was supposed to go. I know stopping the ceremony must feel devastating right now, but sometimes life throws challenges our way for a reason, to protect us from something far greater." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again, but this time they weren't tears of shame or fear. They were tears of gratitude, for the priest who refused to look away, for the chance to confront her past, and for the hope that maybe, just maybe, she could reclaim her future. As Sarah took her place beside Mark at the altar, the church fell silent except for the soft rustling of fabric and the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. The sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows painted colorful patterns on the walls, but Father Thomas' attention remained fixed on Sarah. He couldn't shake the image of that faint mark on her neck. It wasn't just a fleeting shadow or an illusion. It was real, and it didn't belong there. The ceremony began, with Father Thomas reciting the familiar words he'd spoken countless times before. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." His voice echoed through the church, steady and calm, masking the unease growing inside him. Outwardly, everything seemed normal. Sarah and Mark exchanged glances filled with love and excitement, their smiles radiant as they stood hand in hand. But Father Thomas found himself distracted, his mind racing with questions. What was that mark? Why hadn't he noticed it earlier? And why did it make him feel so uneasy? Every time Sarah turned her head slightly, the light caught that spot again, revealing more detail. It wasn't smooth like skin. Instead, it looked jagged, almost like stitching. Father Thomas shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his glasses to get a better look. The longer he stared, the more convinced he became that something wasn't right. He glanced around the room, hoping someone else might have noticed, but everyone else seemed completely absorbed in the beauty of the moment. No one else appeared to see what he saw, or perhaps no one else cared enough to look closely. The priest cleared his throat, trying to focus on the task at hand. He continued reading from the Bible, his voice unwavering despite the turmoil brewing within him. Yet, as the minutes ticked by, the nagging feeling only intensified. He thought back to all the years he'd known Sarah. She had always been open and honest, never one to hide anything significant. So why would she conceal something like this now? Was it possible she didn't even know about it herself? Or was there another explanation altogether? Father Thomas tried to push the thoughts aside, reminding himself that this was a joyous occasion, not the time to dwell on suspicions. Still, his curiosity got the better of him. As he reached the part of the ceremony where the couple would exchange vows, he hesitated. Normally, this was the most emotional and heartwarming moment of any wedding, but today it felt different. Something heavy hung in the air, invisible yet undeniable. The guests leaned forward eagerly, waiting for the heartful promises Sarah and Mark were about to make to each other. But Father Thomas couldn't go on without addressing what was bothering him. Summoning his courage, he paused mid-sentence, causing a ripple of confusion among the attendees. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Everyone froze, unsure of what was happening. Murmurs broke out as people exchanged puzzled glances. Had the priest forgotten his lines? Was he feeling unwell? Before anyone could speculate further, Father Thomas stepped forward, his expression serious but kind. "I apologize for interrupting," he began, addressing Sarah directly. "But I must ask, what is this mark on your neck? Please don't misunderstand me," he added quickly, holding up a hand to reassure her. "I mean no offense. However, it seems unusual, and I believe it deserves some clarification." Sarah blinked in surprise, her cheeks flushing pink. For a brief moment, she looked startled, as if caught off guard. Then, forcing a nervous smile, she laughed lightly. "Oh, Father, it's nothing," she said, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. "Just a birthmark, really. Nothing to worry about." Her tone was casual, almost dismissive, but there was a flicker of discomfort in her eyes that didn't escape Father Thomas's notice. Birthmarks didn't usually look like that, not unless they'd been altered somehow. The priest frowned slightly, sensing that Sarah wasn't telling the whole truth. Whatever this mark was, it clearly meant something important, and until he understood what it was, he couldn't let the ceremony proceed. The tension in the room grew palpable as Father Thomas made a decision. Speaking gently but firmly, he said, "Sarah, I need a moment alone with you. There's something we must discuss." Gasps rippled through the congregation, followed by hushed whispers. People craned their necks, trying to figure out what was going on. Mark shot a bewildered look at his bride, who now looked pale and shaken. Without waiting for a response, Father Thomas gestured for Sarah to follow him into a quiet side room off the sanctuary. The doors clicked shut behind them, leaving the stunned guests to wonder what had just happened, and whether the wedding would continue at all. Back in the main hall, whispers had grown into a low buzz of speculation. Guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at the closed door of the side room, where Sarah and Father Thomas had disappeared. Mark stood near the altar, his hands clasped tightly together, his face pale with worry. He had overheard fragments of the priest's request to speak privately with Sarah, but had no idea what was happening behind those doors. All he knew was that something was terribly wrong. "Do you think she's okay?" one of the bridesmaids asked nervously, leaning toward another guest. Why would Father Thomas stop the ceremony like that? No one had answers, only guesses. Some speculated it might be a family emergency. Others wondered if Sarah had suddenly gotten cold feet. The organist played soft, aimless chords to fill the silence, but even the music couldn't mask the tension hanging thick in the air. Meanwhile, inside the side room, Father Thomas was piecing together clues from Sarah's story. His mind raced as he connected dots he hadn't noticed before. Something about the mysterious benefactor, the secretive surgery, and the unusual scars on Sarah's neck felt eerily familiar. Then it hit him. A memory surfaced from months ago, when he'd read an article about illegal medical experiments disguised as life-saving procedures. Patients were lured by promises of free treatment, only to become unwitting participants in dangerous trials. Could Sarah have fallen victim to such a scheme? "Sarah," Father Thomas said abruptly, turning to her with urgency in his voice. "Did anyone ever explain exactly what kind of surgery you underwent? Did they show you records or give you details about your recovery?" She shook her head, her eyes wide with growing alarm. "No. They just told me I'd been injured badly and needed immediate care. They said it was experimental but safe. Why? Do you think?" Before she could finish, Father Thomas interrupted, his tone grave. "I don't know for sure yet, but there's a chance this wasn't legitimate medical treatment. There have been cases where criminals exploit desperate people, offering them surgeries that aren't approved or ethical. Sometimes, these operations are part of black market organ harvesting rings." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Organ harvesting," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You mean they could have taken something from me without telling me?" "It's possible," Father Thomas admitted reluctantly, "but we won't jump to conclusions until we investigate further." He pulled out his phone again and began searching online for news articles and reports related to shady medical practices. As he scrolled, his suspicions deepened. One particular case caught his attention: a string of patients who had undergone similar life-saving surgeries funded by anonymous benefactors. Many of them later discovered abnormalities in their health, including unexplained scars and missing documentation. "This is it," Father Thomas murmured, showing Sarah the screen. She stared at the article, her heart pounding. The description matched her experience almost perfectly. The hasty procedures, the lack of transparency, the confidentiality agreements. It was chillingly close to home. "But how does Mark fit into all of this?" Sarah asked suddenly, her voice tinged with panic. "He introduced me to the person who referred me to those doctors. What if he's involved somehow?" Father Thomas frowned, considering the possibility. "Mark doesn't strike me as someone capable of deceit," he said carefully, "but it's worth asking him directly. Maybe he unknowingly led you into danger." With Sarah's permission, Father Thomas stepped back into the main hall, leaving her seated in the side room to gather her thoughts. The congregation fell silent as he approached Mark, motioning for him to join him aside. "Son," the priest began gently, "I need to ask you something important. Do you recall introducing Sarah to anyone new recently? Someone who offered her help or opportunities?" Mark looked bewildered. "Not really," he replied hesitantly. "Wait, yes, actually. A business associate of mine mentioned knowing someone in the medical field. He said they specialized in cutting-edge treatments. I passed the contact along to Sarah because she mentioned needing advice about a minor injury. But I swear, Father, I had no idea anything like this would happen." Father Thomas nodded slowly, seeing the sincerity in Mark's eyes. "I believe you," he said, "but we need to dig deeper. Whoever this associate is, they may not realize the harm they've caused, or worse, they might be complicit." As Father Thomas returned to the side room, he found Sarah sitting quietly, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "We'll get to the bottom of this," he assured her, "but first, we need to call off the wedding. You can't make lifelong promises while carrying secrets like this. Trust needs to be built on truth." The moment Sarah and Father Thomas stepped back into the church, all eyes turned toward them. The room fell silent, save for the faint rustle of fabric as guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mark stood near the altar, his face pale with worry, while family members exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke. Everyone seemed to hold their breath, waiting for an explanation. Father Thomas cleared his throat, stepping forward to address the congregation. "Friends," he began, his voice calm but firm, "I regret to inform you that we must postpone today's ceremony." A ripple of gasps spread through the crowd, followed by murmurs of confusion and concern. Some people leaned forward, eager to hear more, while others whispered theories to their neighbors. Sarah stepped beside the priest, her hands trembling but her head held high. She took a deep breath, summoning every ounce of courage she had. "Everyone here knows how much I love Mark," she said softly, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "And I know this isn't how any of us imagined today would go, but something has come to light, something I need to address before I can move forward with my life or make promises to anyone." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For a moment, no one dared to interrupt. Then, a close friend of Sarah's stood up, her expression filled with concern. "What is it, Sarah? Is everything okay?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at Father Thomas for support. He gave her an encouraging nod, silently reminding her that she wasn't alone. "Months ago," she continued, her voice stronger now, "I was involved in a car accident. It left me severely injured, and I underwent surgery to save my life. At the time, I didn't think much about it. I just wanted to survive. But recently, I've discovered that the circumstances surrounding my treatment may not have been legitimate." The room erupted into whispers, the tension palpable. People exchanged shocked looks, unsure of what to say or do. Mark approached Sarah, his brow furrowed with worry. "What are you saying?" he asked gently, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Are you telling me those doctors did something illegal?" "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "But there's evidence suggesting they might have been part of something unethical, perhaps even criminal. And worse." She paused, swallowing hard before continuing. "Mark, your business associate, the one who referred me to them, he may be connected to it too." Mark staggered back, stunned by the revelation. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "That's impossible. I trust him. He wouldn't. He may not realize what he's involved in." Father Thomas interjected gently. "But until we investigate further, we can't rule out the possibility." The weight of the situation settled over the room like a storm cloud. Guests stared at each other, some visibly shaken, others whispering prayers under their breath. Sarah's parents sat frozen in their seats, their faces etched with worry as they processed the news. Even the children, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained unusually quiet. "None of this is your fault," Father Thomas reminded Sarah, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You were vulnerable and desperate, and someone took advantage of that. Now it's time to uncover the truth, not just for your sake, but for anyone else who might be in danger." With that, Sarah turned to Mark, her heart aching at the pain reflected in his eyes. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I never meant to hurt you. But I can't marry you knowing there's still so much uncertainty in my life. I need answers first." Mark nodded slowly, his own eyes brimming with tears. Though heartbroken, he understood. "We'll get through this together," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Whatever happens, I'll stand by you." As the guests filed out of the church, many stopped to offer words of comfort and support. Some hugged Sarah tightly, assuring her she wasn't alone. Others promised to pray for her strength and guidance. Outside, reporters lingered, drawn by rumors of the interrupted wedding. Father Thomas shielded Sarah from their questions, guiding her safely to his car. Back at the rectory, Sarah made a phone call to the hospital where she'd supposedly been treated. To her horror, records confirmed her worst fears. The facility didn't exist under the name she remembered. Worse still, her case file contained falsified information, including forged signatures and fabricated diagnoses. The pieces finally clicked into place. She had indeed been part of something sinister. Though devastated, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. For months, she had carried the burden of secrecy, fearing discovery and judgment. Now, with Father Thomas and Mark by her side, she was ready to confront the truth and fight for justice.